Now, after the show is where the real drama began. After Vince McMahon and Kevin Dunn had already supposedly flown out of Riyadh, they were already on their way back to the United States. There was said to be a mechanical issue with the charter plane that was due to take back more than the 175 people remaining in Saudi Arabia. That's a combination of staff and talent. But there was a mechanical malfunction of some kind. So they ended up sitting on the tarmac waiting for this plane to take off for 7 hours, over 7 hours. And if anybody's ever been stranded on the runway before because of a flight delay, you know how much that sucks. I can't say that I've ever been stranded for 7 hours. If I'm stranded for an hour or two, I'm freaking out. Imagine being stuck on that plane in a foreign country, you have no idea what's going on, you're tired and beat up and sore, over 7 hours of sitting there and not going anywhere. So as this is all going on, there's a small group of wrestlers that end up on a separate charter flight. Now, I don't know if this is something the wrestlers took it upon themselves to do, if WWE arranged for it. It sounds like it was something that whoever these wrestlers were, and I suspect it was the big names like Roman Reigns and people like that, decided to go ahead and charter their own flight. There were about 20 people on there, about 20 different wrestlers, and so they made it out. So this is not a situation where people were being held hostage. I mean, there were so many, it can be hard sometimes to parse fact from fiction and who's telling the truth and is this story bullshit or not. Let me just say this. Nobody knows for sure yet exactly what the hell happened here. WWE's side of it and the airline side of it is it was a mechanical malfunction. That's it. Nothing to see here. But a lot of other people, including some of the wrestlers who have been communicating and sending messages to different reporters and newsletter people and things of that nature, they feel otherwise. So there's a lot of conflicting reports, and I'm going to get into it here. But just be mindful of the fact that we don't yet know 100% exactly what happened here. But there is a lot of speculation. There's a lot of stories and rumors, maybe even a few conspiracy theories tossed in here. But one thing that this was not a hostage situation. Nobody was held at gunpoint. Maybe there were wrestlers on the plane who didn't know what was going on, and they were scared, and they felt that they were maybe being held there against their will. I don't doubt that there are wrestlers who felt that way, but there's no indication that this was any kind of, you're not allowed to leave, you're not allowed to get off the plane, or else. Nobody was being held at gunpoint, nobody was being held hostage, so let's just get that out first, okay? Plus, if they were being held, these 20 other wrestlers would not have been able to charter their own plane and get the hell out of there. So they took off. Now, in WWE's infinite wisdom, and they're lucky that those guys were able to take off, I guess, well, maybe it didn't matter in the end, because the idea was maybe they'd make it back in time for SmackDown, because they had a TV taping, a live TV show on Fox the day after. In their infinite wisdom, they decided to book a show in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, on a Thursday, and Buffalo, New York, on a Friday. That's a 20-hour flight, over 6,600 miles from Riyadh to Buffalo. Not exactly a popular flight path. So the airline, Atlas Air, issued an apology for the delay. This is what they said. They said, a chartered WWE passenger flight operated by Atlas Air is currently delayed in Riyadh due to a mechanical issue. Our top priority is always to ensure that our passengers arrive safely and on time at their destination. The aircraft is being repaired and will be inspected and certified before returning to service to transport our passengers to their final destination. We regret that operational disruptions delayed the flight and apologize to our passengers who were inconvenienced. I doubt very seriously that Atlas would have copped to a mechanical failure unless there really was some kind of a mechanical problem. I fail to see what the upside would be for them to cover for WWE or to lie about the situation in some way. So I'm not doubting there was some kind of a mechanical issue that probably did occur. But that being said, there's a lot of people and a lot of wrestlers who feel there's far more to this story than just a mechanical issue. And I did see the video where I couldn't understand a word he was saying, so I had to rely on a translation. But former WWE Spanish language announcer Hugo Savinovich recorded a video in Spanish. He still has a lot of sources in the company. He worked there for, so many years. And people translated the video and what he was saying. And he was claiming that he heard from sources within WWE that the company still has not been paid, or at least up until the day of this Saudi show that just took place last week, they had not yet been paid on the last Saudi show, at least the last one, if not the last two. So we're talking tens of millions. Some people have said hundreds of millions. We're at least talking tens of millions of dollars that WWE had still supposedly not received for at least the last show, which would have been Super Showdown in June. And so what ended up happening here is that Vince McMahon decided to retaliate, supposedly, as the story goes, by cutting the live feed in Saudi Arabia at the start of the show. And there are reports that for people who were watching live, whatever the local channel was that they were watching the show on there, obviously on the WWE network, it aired fine. There were no issues, there were no delays. But over there were some reports and tweets from people suggesting that the show did not start airing until about an hour or two after its originally scheduled airtime. So there could very well be truth to the idea that Vince McMahon said, listen, they're pulling a power play on us here. We need to get paid, or we need to know that we're going to get paid. Cut the feed until we resolve this. If this is true, and that's a big if. I'm not saying Hugo's lying, although he could be getting bad information. But if this is true, think about this. This is a government run by a crown prince who ordered a man to be killed and dismembered for speaking out against him and his regime. I hardly think it would be a bright move to cut the feed to the live show when you've got almost 200 of your own employees, independent contractors, in that country working a show. That would be idiotic. But we know the almighty dollar is all that matters to this man, so it would be hardly a surprise. Not a very smart move, though, if that's what happened. So, if that's the case, then as the story goes, the Crown Prince was angered, and the people of the sports authority who helped organize this whole deal with WWE. They have this Saudi Sports Authority, which really is, it's the government. Let's just call it what it is. They weren't very happy about that. And they decided to fuck with the wrestlers' travel plans. I'm not saying they went under the plane and started cutting wires and shit, but they, look, if they wanted to, believe me, they can ground that plane and cause a lot of headaches for a lot of people, and there's a lot of people who believe that's exactly what may have happened here. Now, if they're having trouble getting paid, or if they're being paid late, by the Saudis, I don't see how they can be trusted. How do you move forward with this deal and risk another episode like this from happening? If you're one of the wrestlers who got stuck in the middle of all this nonsense because of a money issue that you had absolutely nothing to do with, you're like a pawn in a chess game here. How are you going to risk this, repeating itself again in the future? You're supposed to do this twice a year for the next 16 years. Oh my God, 16 years. 8 years. 16 shows. Can you imagine 16 years of this shit? 8 years is long enough. I don't see how you can work with a partner like that and continue on if this is what's going on. Now, to make matters worse, there's a lot of resentment within the company, supposedly, as far as Vince McMahon is concerned, because Vince McMahon, the perception is that he left them high and dry. He got on his plane and he headed home while all of this other nonsense was going on. It's very possible that he didn't know that. When he stepped onto the plane and he took off, they had no idea that this was happening. They had no idea there was a mechanical issue and the plane was grounded. We don't know. We don't know what his knowledge was or wasn't before he took off. I would like to think that he wouldn't have left knowing that, hey, there's a problem brewing here. You better stick around. At the same time, you got SmackDown the next day, and him and Kevin Dunn are on the same flight, and they're probably like, well, we got to get to SmackDown. Maybe they did take off knowing that there was shit going down. We don't know. But there's a lot of wrestlers very resentful who are looking at Vince McMahon in a very different light after this episode. The optics of this are terrible. And so it's not surprising that you have a lot of wrestlers right now who are very unhappy with Vince McMahon. Wrestlers who have lost a lot of respect for him as they were stuck and stranded there, he was already well on his way home. This whole thing is a total nightmare. A total nightmare. That is a long enough flight just to get there. Then to wrestle, then get on a plane and sit there for 7 hours, not moving. You're tired, you're sore, you're beat up, you're away from your family, you're away from your kids on Halloween. There were a bunch of wrestlers posting pictures of their kids in their Halloween costumes. They were very depressed. They had to be away for that. You're trying to get out of this foreign country. Now, eventually they got out of there 12 hours later, or whatever it was. Their charter finally landed at JFK Airport here in New York yesterday afternoon, Saturday afternoon. But Raw is in New York tomorrow night, so I would imagine that a lot of the talent may have just opted to stay in New York rather than fly home. Unless they live close to New York. You know, if you live in New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, then yeah, you can go home. But what sense would it make if you're scheduled to be on Raw Monday night at the Nassau Coliseum and you fly into New York on a Saturday afternoon? What are you going to do? You're going to fly to California for not even a day? That doesn't make any sense. So you probably have a lot of wrestlers who still haven't been home, and they're sitting in a hotel somewhere right now after everything that they had to go through on this trip. Some of the talent did try flying home, and they got fucked because they encountered even more flight delays out of New York, which is not a surprise. I say that as a New Yorker. They had trouble getting home because they missed their connecting flights in Atlanta. And get this. The crew leaves for a European tour this week. Kicks off in Brighton, England. Then they go to Manchester, Leeds, Aberdeen, and Glasgow. Then they come right back and they go to SmackDown in Philadelphia. And this is all after having just come back from a tour of Australia. Let us not forget that. That was the tour where Xavier Woods tore his Achilles. What a glamorous life. Sure makes that union that FS1 reporter was asking Bailey about sound pretty appealing, doesn't it? Imagine being one of those 175 people sitting on that plane. You're not taking off. Hours have gone by with no explanation, or you're told of a mechanical issue that apparently a lot of them didn't even buy into. But you're sitting there 6,000 miles away from home. You don't know what the fuck is going on. So many wrestlers were feeding different stories and messages to Meltzer and Keller and Alvarez and Sean Ross Sapp. Look, I was on Wade Keller's show live on Friday night after SmackDown. And before we went live, he was telling me about some of the messages that he was getting from some of the talent. And it's absolutely ridiculous that they had to go through what they went through. And you're sitting there in Saudi Arabia, of all places. Imagine the thoughts going through their heads, not knowing why they're not being allowed to fly out of there. And their dear leader is already on another plane halfway home. Now, these are human beings. They're not cattle. What genius thought it would be a good idea to have the Thursday before a live Fox show in Buffalo as a good time for a live pay-per-view in Riyadh? They're scheduled to have 16 more of these shows on the remaining 8 years of what is believed to be a 10-year deal. And if the money story turns out to be even remotely true, I mean, there's a lot of different stories where the money is concerned. You know, one version of events from the Observer is that they were only paid, I think it was something like $60 million deposited into their account. They were only paid on the morning of Crown Jewel. That they were paid, but that's how late they got paid for that last show. It was the morning of Crown Jewel last week. All of a sudden the money was deposited. If this is going to continue to go on or they're not paying, you know, what they said they're going to pay, or they're not paying on time, and all these different things are going on, why in the hell are they sending these people over there? And to be honest, even if the money story isn't true, you could ask that same question. Now, what's even worse is that all of this seems to have created some kind of friction among members of the locker room. Not just anger at the company and anger at Vince McMahon, but friction amongst members of the roster. Luke Harper and Curtis Axel were among those tweeting about not being part of the, quote, top 20 who were able to charter a plane out of there while everybody else was stuck on the tarmac. Harper said, well, I guess I didn't want it enough to pay for my own charter, but I'm home now. Hashtag not top 20. Axel tweeted, he goes, not top 20, and then he used the middle finger emoji, and he included a picture of himself at home kissing his daughter. He said, I'm number one at home. We don't leave each other behind. A very telling line there in that tweet. They're like soldiers on the battlefield. Never leave a man behind. Carl Anderson said, looking forward to seeing who the locker room leader is on Monday. And then he put a popcorn emoji in there. See, this is what happens in 2019. This is how wrestlers communicate, unlike 20 or 30 years ago. You know, they'd get into bar fights, and the way they would communicate was probably just to beat the shit out of each other. Now they use emojis on social media to get their point across. But you read these tweets, and it was very clear that there is a lot of angst and a lot of bitterness, even from within. This could be creating tension from within. The last thing they need is a divided locker room or some kind of locker room rebellion. I'm not saying that's what's going to happen. Who knows what's going to happen? When they get to the building on Monday night at the Nassau Coliseum, it's going to be very interesting to follow along if there's any backstage stories once everybody is back in the same place on Monday night, to see if there's any fallout from this. But this Saudi deal feels like it may be falling apart, and they're only 4 shows in. Good luck with the other 16. I can't wait for Sweet Saudi Money 5. Where's my money?